Today is August 23rd, 2023. My name is Melissa Ackerman, and I will be interviewing Toby Gerber for the JCC Past Presidents Project. Hi, Toby. How are you?
Hi, Melissa.
It's so good to see you.
Same here.
What was the JCC's official name during your tenure?
The Jewish Community Center of Dallas, Inc.
Nobody's name attached to it?
No. It was the follow-up from the Julius Shep Center, and that changed over in the mid-'70s.
Mm-hmm. And what years did you serve?
As president, 1990 to 1992. I went on the board in the early 80s sometime.
Mm-hmm. And what was your title? Were you president or chairman?
We called it president in those days.
Way back then?
Yeah.
Okay. And who were some of the various leaders that were involved during your tenure?
Well, that was our cup runneth over in terms of really great leadership at that time, both lay leadership and professional leadership. In those days, Lauren Weinstein, Harlan Pollock, Mel Isaacs, Harold Berman, who I'll talk about a little bit later, Don Schaefer, and of course Marty Goldman, who once wanted me to be sure to mention his name. They really did the hard work, in all seriousness, of keeping the flame going in some very tough times in the 80s for the center, and it's a great tribute to them that we're here today.
What were some of those challenges that were taking place right before, as you came on?
Yeah, the main challenge was, 90 to 92 when I became president, but in the years prior to that, Dallas, the country in a lot of ways, but Dallas in particular, had gone through a very bad economic recession. The oil markets here collapsed, the real estate markets here collapsed, and a lot of people don't remember or aren't able to remember because they weren't alive then that banks were failing, and it had a profound economic effect on our community. And of course, economics is in part what gives us the ability to accomplish our mission around here. And so we were very challenged during that time period. At the same time, we were coming out of a huge program to bring Soviet Jews into the United States, and Dallas was at the forefront of bringing and settling Soviet Jews here. So our community reached out, stretched itself financially, both as a result of the economic conditions and as a result of settling and doing the great work of bringing our brothers and sisters from the Soviet Union to freedom here in the U.S. And so that was, I think, our biggest challenge. We were in a struggle financially for membership because people couldn't afford to join, and we couldn't afford, without that lifeblood, we couldn't afford to provide the services, or let me put it this way, there was a gap. So we had to get pretty creative in those days to make it work.
Mm-hmm. And did the J offer special memberships to all the different people that were being resettled?
That was the challenge. We had I can distinctly recall several management cabinet, that's what we called the officers, and a couple selected leaders from the board. Sorry.
That's okay.
I can remember several management cabinet meetings in which we kind of looked each other in the eye and we said two things to ourselves. Number one, we're never going to turn away a child or a family from membership, from programming, from camp, from preschool. Okay, and that was a lofty and noble goal, but then there was the hard reality of how do we deliver those services? How do we pay our staff? How do we keep the lights on? And we looked around that room and we said to each other, we'll do whatever it takes. And what that meant was, whenever there was a shortfall, and whenever we needed to increase the scholarship line, I don't know if that's still in the budget or not, but we had a scholarship line that was, on a growth curve. And we went out, the individuals in that management cabinet, we went out and tapped resources within the community and said, we need this. We called upon our members of the community to fill that gap, and to my great pride in being able to, on behalf of the center, to deliver those people came through.
Yeah. I was going to ask you how you were able to fill that shortfall.
Yeah, well, we had a good story to tell because the mission here is so great, and it's something that people really make a part of their life. But the story to tell is one thing, getting someone to dig into their pocket to help out, and to the great credit of this community of Dallas and Texas, we were able to meet that challenge.
That's great. How did the Jewish community interact with the secular community?
Yeah, that's a good question. It sort of implies that the center isn't secular, and we're in those days there was a tension between what we owed to the Jewish community and the need for those funds, and we had a struggle for a time in dealing with whether or not we would actively market to the non-Jewish community in terms of membership and in terms of programming.
So it was mostly Jewish membership at that time?
Yeah, it was, and it was a difficult line to take for a couple of reasons. Number one was there was a well-represented group within the center, and it was a respected position that we should be first and foremost the Jewish community's first name in our title. On the other hand, we were highly dependent on financial support from various organizations, including the United Way. And the United Way, as we presented each year for our funding from the United Way, one of the questions they always asked was, well, what's your percentage? And we certainly didn't fudge the figures, and we were in the high 90s in terms of percentage of Jewish members compared to non-Jewish. And the question from them always was, does that mean you're a religious organization? But on the other hand, we also had, I don't know if it was ever in writing, I doubt it, but there was a contract, I felt bound to a contract that we didn't conduct religious services here. We're not a spiritual organization. We're not a religious organization.
Was that ever requested? Did people come to you?
Yeah, I mean, from time to time, we got requests from the religious community to conduct services, to use our facilities for things like that. And it was a very, strangely, you would think, well, of course you can come here. We welcome everybody. But it was a very difficult issue for us to deal with. And the reverse was true. We got scolded from time to time about whether or not our programming had too much of a spiritual or religious. That was the turf of the religious community. Mm-hmm. So we walked a fine line that I don't think is necessarily obvious from the outside, people viewing the organization, but it was a question. And then we also had things like, would we keep open on Shabbat? Mm-hmm. Okay, that was always a battle.
Probably still comes up periodically.
I remember getting called to Shelley Zimmerman's office when he was rabbi at Emmanuel, and his daughter was on the, I think I've got this right, I hope I'm not, well, some rabbi's daughter was on the gymnastics team, and there was a tournament on Shavuot, and the question was, were we going to participate, you know? And it was a very interesting conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. What was the relationship between the J and the Federation?
In the broader sense, it could have been better. One of the issues throughout my time on the board, not just when I was president, but it was kind of it was an us versus them mentality, and I think both on the center side and on the Federation side, there was enough blame to go along. There had been, prior to me coming on the board, prior to then executive directors, prior to that time, there had been some less than transparent dealings between the Federation and the JCC, and it was resented over at the Federation, and there was a certain amount of that resentment which translated into our relationship. So it was difficult, but one of the things, and this, when I first became president, I think the first thing I said to the board and the first report I made to the Federation was, it can't be you versus us or us versus you. There's only one Jewish community here, you know, the way we see things. And things improved, but there was difficulty in funding, as there always is, because we needed, whenever we wanted to do something, we had to, major of any sort, we had to seek permission. And, you know, some of us younger leaders at that point, was young, bristled at that, but also it went the other way too. There was what we felt we had certain leadership responsibilities in terms of programming, and Federation from time to time, which in those days at least was not supposed to be a programming agency, started developing programs, and we felt it was a little bit of an infringement, if you will. And I'm not sure that it was intentionally done that way, but there was definitely a communications gap in the years prior, and no criticism of anyone, it was just the way it was.
Who was the executive at the J at the time?
At the time of the problems?
Well, when you served.
When I was, it was Karen Stern. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, and Karen got me into Jewish activism long before I was ever on, within the community, long before I was ever on the J board.
How did you know her?
She was a good friend of one of my law partners, Jay Fickner, and he introduced Karen. She was Karen Greenstone in those days, to me, and she was executive director of American Jewish Congress. And so I got active in American Jewish Congress, and then one thing led to another. That was really my entree into the community. And I might say something about that too. That was what I thought was really a golden age of Jewish involvement in the Dallas community in social justice. We had several really fine organizations. American Jewish Congress was one, but American Jewish Committee and the ADL were leaders within the community for social justice, for church versus state issues, for anti-Semitism issues, of course, but many things that we as a Jewish community did, and you know, we housed those, not their offices, but meetings and programming for those organizations, which was a proud moment for the center. But I also don't want to let that point go without mentioning, you know, what great leadership we had in those organizations, really phenomenal, enlightened people. Thelma Vogel, Doris Budman, Ann Socorro, okay, just, I mean, giants, if you can say that about very small women. But they were terrific, you know, and they had, and there were people throughout those organizations that were splendid. You know, they were people who I looked up to from a community standpoint. And those memories shouldn't be forgotten.
No, not at all. Were there any significant local, national, or international events that had an effect on your era?
You know, we sit here in 2023, you know, in what is probably the most politically divisive, just uncomfortable situation that I've ever had in my lifetime in terms of divisive social turmoil. So the disruptions that occurred in the 80s and the 90s seem almost idyllic to me. You know, they seem solvable. They always seemed solvable to me. They didn't keep me up at night. They didn't make me despair for the future of my community, my children, my grandchildren. But as I said, I think the largest disruption we had was the economic disruption in the late 80s and late 90s, in the early 90s, and recovering, coming out of that. So, I mean, people, as I said, people forget. There was a time when, you know, I'm a lawyer, primarily represent banks, large financial institutions. There was a time when I represented maybe 20 banks locally situated in Texas and, you know, national banks, but or some state banks, which were headquartered here in Texas. By the end of the 1980s, starting in maybe 86 through 90, every Texas-based bank failed. When you think about the banks, you might remember, or people might remember, Republic Bank, First National Bank of Dallas, Interfirst Bank, which was some variation, First Interstate when they merged, and then they failed. So that Mercantile Bank, all of them either failed or were taken over by, you know, large national institutions. Those all went away, and they went away because our economy had made it, those banks' financial ability to continue unsustainable. That's how bad it was. So that was the significant event that I think affected us directly.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm going to go a slightly different direction.
Sure.
Who were the prominent supporters of the J during your years?
Yeah, I think we had many great givers, and most of whom, all of whom, might have been one or two, never wanted to let it be known that they were giving. So when we went out for our little mission to fill the scholarship line, we went to certain targeted folks, okay, and their names, you know, I don't know if I need to repeat them.
No.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is that they were out there. Their names are maybe not on buildings, some I think are, but they were the people that belonged to the center, but never walked in the door.
They were loyal, and
they were loyal, and they didn't just pay their membership. There was a donation every year. They funded through Federation. They earmarked gifts to the Federation, so that many came to us. They earmarked gifts to United Way, pardon me, so that those gifts came to us.
Was the J doing any big fundraisers at that time?
We were somewhat restricted.
It'll come back on.
Okay, there we go.
They're trying to conserve energy.
There was a Federation versus Center issue on that too, because there were periods of time throughout the year when Federation Drive was going on where we couldn't solicit funds. So our big fundraisers tended to be casino night or things like that. So, and we had them, but they were, in today's dollars, and even in relation to the budget we were facing, I think our budget was maybe $3 or $4 million in those days. But those were things that only raised, small portions of that.
Not the big splashy events that are put on.
No, I mean, our version of it might have been a casino night, something like that. I think sometime after, it wasn't too long after my term, but we did past presidents.
We did. I have the program at home. I'm actually going to bring it in.
It's an interesting story. I just wanted to tell this. I want to get it on the record somewhere, but it was shortly after my mother had passed away, so it had to be like 92, 93, something like that. So it might have been during Ann Stern's term, who, by the way, is just the greatest. And I was so pleased when she followed me as president. But my father, who lived in Houston, came on. I said, "Dad, come on up. We'll go to the past presidents thing." And he said, "Well, is it black tie?" And I said, "Yeah." He goes, "Okay, I'll bring my tuxedo." I said, "Well, this is great." Okay, so it was on a Sunday night, and I'm going to get dressed, and I can't find my tuxedo because it was at the cleaners, and I'm sure it was my fault, but of course I probably tried to blame Diane. But anyway, my father says, "Don't worry about it, you'll wear my tuxedo." And I go, "Well, what will you wear?" He goes, "Well, I brought a dark suit as well." I go, "You brought a suit along with your tuxedo?" He goes, "Yeah, I kind of thought you might do something silly." So I wore my father's tuxedo to that, and he wore a dark suit.
Are there any other of the past presidents that were influential in your growth and development?
Yeah, of course, the ones I mentioned as well, and they were just great teachers. Great to have them. The greatest influence on my life and as part of the community in Dallas was Harold Berman. Diane and I moved here in 1975, right out of law school at Georgetown, and we moved to Dallas. I had a job with Harold's firm, with Berman, Fichtner, and Mitchell. And Harold is the one who kind of introduced me to the community, introduced me to the J. This was in 75, 76. The J had just finished the big improvement, we thought in that time, the big improvement, and switched from Julius Schett to the center. But the building, the legal work on the renovations was still going on, and Harold had been handling all that. The firm had been handling all that, but Harold primarily, and he dumped those files on my desk as a young lawyer, and I spent the next year, 18 months, clearing up mechanics liens and making sure everything got done properly, making sure all the paperwork was done from a real estate standpoint and from a building contract standpoint. And I got invited to at the end of that, I got invited to a board meeting at the center. It was the first time I'd ever been at a board meeting. And they introduced me and gave me a pen set, cross-desk pen set, and that still sits on my desk. After all these years, still sits on my desk at the office, and it's from the JCC. It was so Harold was the one.
Was he president?
Yeah,
at
he
the
was
time?
president. Not at that time. He had been president earlier. I'm trying to think who might have been president at that time. It was before. Mel, but I don't remember who.
Is it Harlan Pollock?
No, this was Harlan,
It was after.
Lauren, Marty, me, I think, and then I don't know what happened.
We'll go look on the wall outside.
Yeah, I'll go
It's-
look
it
at
has-
the wall.
Yes. How has Dallas changed since you moved here in the 70s?
Well, you know this as well as I do. I think I used to say, firstly, traffic is just terrible. Let me be the last to complain. No, I mean, it's changed in a lot of ways from a community standpoint. I think it has just become way more diverse than ever before. And this is in the face of challenges, in the political situation where diversity, may not be shared as a goal. It's always been our goal as a community because we were a minority, and we're still a minority here. But I do think that Dallas as a city is so much more sophisticated. There are so many more, along with that, so many more problems than we used to have. It is more of I truly believe, I think there's always been divides between racial divides and economic divides, but I do believe that now those divides are greater than ever. There may be a much larger class of people who have wealth here in terms of numbers, but the division is even greater between the haves and the have-nots here, which is always going to be a challenge. When we moved to Dallas, we thought it was the greatest place to raise a family, and we were right about that. I still believe it. I still think I still tout Dallas to our young attorneys who are moving here for the first time that this is the place where you can raise a family, where there's opportunity. There's no built-in barriers as there were, I think, in the 70s. I mean, in the 70s, when I moved here, there were still law firms that wouldn't hire Jews or had a quota on Jews. It was pretty clear in those days who those law firms were. That's just no longer an issue. Okay? And it's no longer an issue from a race standpoint either. There are not there's not that kind of open divisions that we used to see. But there are still challenging economic divisions here.
Mm-hmm. When you were growing up, you grew up in Houston.
No, I grew up in Chicago.
Grew up in
actually.
Chicago.
Yeah.
Okay, so your dad lived in Houston. So
Yeah,
okay.
well, my parents moved to
Okay.
Houston towards the end of my father's career. He moved to
Okay.
Houston. Yeah.
Okay, so when you grew up in Chicago, was your family members of a Jewish community center up there?
My family was not, but I was. There was a little community center called the Max Strauss Jewish Community Center, as part of the JCCA, on Lawndale Avenue in Chicago. It was about the size of this room.
And
It had
what
a
did-
basketball court.
okay.
It had a basketball court. It had a softball field, okay, and it was right across from the shul, where we used to go to, where my parents were members and very active. Our whole family, my grandparents, my aunts and uncles, belonged to KJS in Chicago, and we used to go there. We used to go there to play balls. There were dances there. We got to meet girls.
Ooh, okay.
Yeah.
So that was an important part of your growing up.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's great. So, in relation to your time at the J, what are you most proud?
I obviously knew you were going to ask that question, and I thought about that a lot, and I never thought of it. I know I've mentioned the word having pride prior to this time, but I never thought of it. I never thought of something that I accomplished that I was more proud of than the whole idea of being president of the center. That It was very special to me, to my family. And I think it's something that all of the past presidents shared. It wasn't so much that it was an honor, but it certainly was an honor. It was a responsibility that we embraced. You know, we looked forward to it. I mean, people used to spend years on the ladder, you know, moving up from secretary-treasurer to vice president to president, because there were a couple of vice presidents in those days. And it was a responsibility, something that we embraced. But I do think we did a good job of taking some significant steps to reuniting the Federation and the Center. It helped that we started in my administration, we started turning back surpluses to them. We gave them back a check. But I think that was, as I said, that was the first thing I said in each of my reports to the Center and to the Federation, and I think I've fulfilled that goal. So if I had to choose one thing, that was it. The other thing was keeping the faith on not ever turning anyone away. I think that was something that everybody on our board has always committed to, and it was something I didn't want to be the one to drop the ball on that, not on my watch.
Great. Is there anything else you'd like to?
Yeah, I want to mention Stuart Prescott. I know I mentioned it. I may have mentioned it to you in my email to you, but I did want to mention Stuart Prescott because that long trip on the ladder. I may have spent, by the way, the shortest time on the ladder because I never served as secretary-treasurer, and I only served as one of the vice presidents, and there happened to be a couple vacancies occurred. So they filled in under me, so I got pushed to the top. I was only 39 when I became president of Center, and I think at that time, I'm sure it's changed, there's been others younger, but at that time I was the youngest president in the history of the Center. The Center was close to 100 years old. So, but Stuart, we had to go, when Stuart got on the ladder, we made him serve at least 2 terms as secretary-treasurer, which, by the way, is the worst job. Tell him he had to serve the second time, and it nearly destroyed our friendship. But, you know, that's the other thing that was that I'm most proud of is the friends I made here at the Center, and that my family had here at the Center.
Thank you so much for sitting down and talking.
My pleasure.
Really appreciate
Melissa,
it.
Thank you.